Friends, welcome back to Devtastic. So in this video, we will check out how to call a REST API from our Flutter app. Also, after getting the response from the API, how to bind it to the UI on the go with the using of the model classes. So let's have a quick demo of the application, like how it looks after the implementation. As you can see, we have a get to do's button here. So as soon as I click on that button, so there is a load indicator which comes inside that button, and also there is a list view which appeared after getting the response from the API. And here you can see this data, whatever we are seeing in the list items, right? So all this data is coming from the sample API that we are calling from our Flutter application. So I have already created a new Flutter application, that is REST services Flutter. So you can create your own and we can get started. So let me create some basic application, that is void main run app. So let me create one application class. So let this extend state less widget, and we need to have a build method. Let's remove this, and here we need to return the same app. So here let us return the material app. The home can be another app. Let me create one more class for our page. New app extends. Again, this should extend a stateful widget, because whenever we get the response back from the services, again we need to update our list view. So we need to extend this with a stateful widget. Stateful widget. Because this is a stateful widget, we need to override a create state method. So in this create state method, we need to return the state object. Again, let's create the state class. This should extend a state of the type my new app. So here I can return the same thing. Because this is a state class, so this should override a build method. Yes. So now here this build method should return the scaffold. So here let's create some app bar. Let the title be a simple text, and that should be fine. Let's give some color. Okay, that is done, and let's give the body. So let's create a simple container for now, and the child can be a simple text test data. Okay, let's save this and let's run this application. So here I need to pass my new app. Yes, I think this is fine. So again, before running the application, make sure you have selected a proper target. Now I have selected the iOS 16 because I have already running my iPhone 16 simulator. So you can do the same. So I'll go to the new terminal and I'll run this application using flutter run command. Yes. So our application is deployed to the simulator. As you can see, we have added an app bar and we have added a simple text component with the test data. Let's build calling in REST API. So that let's add a button to this page, so that whenever we click on that button, let's call the API. So I'll remove this child and I'll add a elevated button. Okay, so now I'll keep this function as is, and I'll add the child as a simple text. The text can be get to do's. Okay, I'll save this and I'll reload the application. So we got the get to do's. So now as soon as we click on this get to do's button, so we need to call an API, right? let's write a separate function to call an API. So before that, let me show you some sample API data. Yes. So here I am using this dummy JSON API to get this response. So whenever we call this API, right, so we will get this response where I have a list of to-dos. So each item have user ID, title and completed. Okay, so this is one object. Now we have a list of objects. Okay, this is the sample response and this is a JSON response, right? So whenever we call this API, we will get a JSON response back, and that JSON response is a list of objects, and each object having a 4 properties. Okay, this is a sample response. Now let's make use of the same API from our code to get this response. Let's do that. So inside our class, let's create a new method to fetch the data from the API. Okay, so before creating that method, so now we are interacting with the outside world, right, from our application. So now we need to use the network to get the details from the API, right? So that we need to install or add a new package called HTTP. Okay, so that HTTP package will be used to call the service calls. Okay, so now we can do that using our terminals. Let me stop the application running, and we can run a command called flutter pub add HTTP, and now here we can mention the version, which version we need to install. That, let's say I'll say 1.3.0, that is the latest one, and I'll hit enter. So now package will be installed. You can verify that using this pubspec.yaml file. You can go there, and if you could scroll here, right, in the dependencies, you can able to see HTTP with the version whatever we have given while adding that. Okay, so now the package which is required is added. Now let's create the function. So now let's create the function with the future, because we are waiting for something which will take some time to respond back, right? Let's create it as a fetch data. Right. So here we need to call the API. So here we need to call the API and we need to get the response. So let's create a variable called response. So now here we need to use the HTTP dot get. So now, because we have not imported that, let us import that. So now this get will expect us to pass the URL. So URL is nothing but whatever we have it here. Okay, let's copy this, and we can't directly pass this as something like this. Okay, so we need to use proper format. So that format is, we need to use the URI.parse. So we are parsing it, right? So we'll paste the string here. So now this is okay. One more thing we need to keep in mind, because now we should wait for the response, right? So now we are calling an API. So if the load or the data from this API is more, then it might take a few seconds to get the data. So our execution should wait till this get should complete. So that we need to use the keyword called await. Okay, because now this is awaiting for the response. This method will become async method, right? So because now this method will be an asynchronous method and it is waiting for some task to complete, and the task in this case is to get the data from the API. So now this is fine. So now let's say after getting the response, check whether our response got the success response or not. So that we can do if response dot status code. We can check for the status code, and again we know that, right, the status code 200 indicates the success. And also we can add a conditions for multiple status codes, something like 500 which is internal server error, and also we can go with 401 which is unauthorized, and so many other like 403 which is forbidden. So it will have multiple status codes that we can check. So now let's go with this 200 for now. So now if at all we got a success response, Okay, so now we need to get the data from this API. Okay, so this API, whatever we have seen in the browser, no, this is the decoded version of the response. So now we will not get the same kind of a response from the code. So from the code we will get a lot of other properties also as part of the response, like request headers, response headers, a lot of other details. But after getting a success code, we need to extract that response, right? So let's do that. Because the response is of the type list, as we already seen. So let's create a dynamic list of dynamic objects. Equal to, now we have a called JSON dot decode. So JSON is again how it comes with your Dart package itself, dot convert. So this will convert our JSON object to a dynamic object. Okay, so here we need to pass response dot body. So body is the object where we have the exact response, whatever we are saying it here. Okay, so apart from body we will have other properties also, but those properties will carry some other details, not the exact response details. Okay, so now we will have the data in our to-dos. Else, so let's throw some exception. Throw exception here. Let's give some custom message. Fail to get to-dos. I think it should be fine. So now to see the body data, I'll put a breakpoint here and let's debug this one. Okay, on the button click there is nothing happening because we are not calling this a fetch data method from our button click, right? So let's do that. Data. So here fetch data. So let's save this. So now I'll click on this get to dos. Yes, so we got the breakpoint here. That means if I hover the cursor on the response, as you can see here, the status code says 200, right here. So that it went inside our if condition. And now if I keep a cursor on this body, as you can see, we have a user ID 3, date ID 1, title buy groceries, completed false. So this is the first item in our response list. If I go back to our browser, see here, so this is the object which is showing up there. So now we are getting the proper response. Let me stop the execution. So now we got the response. Now we need to bind this to the UI, right? So because we are getting the response as a list of objects, so let us add a list view and bind the data to the list view so that it will show up in the UI, right? So let's do that now. Let's come to the build method. We are using a container. As we already know, if we use a container, we cannot add a multiple components. So let us add a column component where we will have a list of childrens, so that we can add a multiple components. So let's remove this container. Yes, so now we have a elevated button. Let us run this. Yes, so now let me add one more component to this column widget, list view builder. So now this should be a context index. Okay, so now before this we need to add a item count. So for this item count, we need to take this as a count, right? Because we are decoding our data or response data to this to-dos object. So let's make this to-dos object with this class specific. Save. Okay, and let this accept dynamic for now. So let's remove this now. Okay, so now we can use this to-dos as our list count length. That is fine. So now here let's return list title can be a simple text component. So now the data for this should be this to-dos, because this is a list that we are pointing index. And let's see what is the property name here. We have title, right? Let's use that title because we are directly accessing the JSON content, right? So that should be enclosed with the single quotes. So now let's close this, let's save, let's restart the application. Yes, so now we are not able to see the elevated button and also the list view, right? This is because we have already seen this multiple times. Whenever we are using column and a widget and multiple components inside that, and especially when we are using list view, let's enclose our list view inside a expanded component. Again, this expanded component will accept a child, and our entire list view builder will be a child for this. Let me save this, let me restart the application. Yes, so we got our button back. So now let me click on the button. Now there is nothing happening. I'm clicking on this, we are getting the data back here. It is decoding to to-dos list object, but that is not updating in the list view, right? Because we are not updating this to-dos inside a set state method. That is why our Flutter is not recognizing this update. So let us do that. Let's set state. Let's put it inside that. Save this. Let's restart our application. Okay. So now I'll click on this get to-dos. Yes. So as soon as we click on that, it took some time to get, hit the API and to get the response, and it decoded. As you can see, this is the list view. So now let's add some more details to this list items. So that is, let me add a subtitle. That should be a simple text. Let this be a title, and here let it be ID. Okay, let it be a ID, and let's concatenate or manipulate with note dollar. Yes, so let's save this, and we'll also add some style for this bold. Okay, let's save, let's restart the application. Again, if I click on this button, yes, see now we got note 1 by grocery and all the other items, right? So now as you observe here, we are directly accessing the JSON object, JSON properties here, right? But this is not the best practices that we need to do. Instead, we need to create a model class. We need to decode our JSON object to our model object. Then here we need to read the model object, not the direct JSON. So let's do that now. So that we need to create a new model here. So let me create a class that is to do. Let me create a properties. So now let's create this model object only with the required properties, right? So now we are reading from the UI, that is ID and title, right? We are not using any other properties like user ID or completed. So let us create our model only with ID and title. Final int ID, final string title. So let's create the constructor. This is fine now. Okay, so now to decode our JSON object with this to-do object, we need a special method of the type factory. Okay, let's create that factory, and to-do dot from JSON. Okay, this should expect a map with string and dynamic, because we are getting the JSON as a dynamic, so we need that. Let's call it as data, right? So here we need to return the to do of the id will be a data of id. The same thing whatever we are getting from the JSON, the same thing with title, data of single quotes title. So now, so previously we were directly accessing this data inside our list view. So now we are trying to convert that JSON object into our model object. Now this is done. So now let's use this to do instead of this one, right? So let's remove that. So inside our set state, let's create the list of dynamic to-dos is equal to json.decode. So we need to pass response.body. That is done. Now we will get a to-dos. Now we need to use this to-dos to do the JSON conversion. Okay. So that we need to again create the list of to-dos data. Let that be an empty list of the type to-do. So here, let me remove this. To-dos data is equal to, now we need to map this to-dos dot map. Here it should be a single object. Let's consider as a to-do JS object. From that object, let us do to-do dot from JSON. So here we need to pass to-do object. We need to pass this object and dot to list, because we are making or decoding into a list. See, here we have created a list of to-do. Let me save this. So now here we have a to-dos list. So in our list view, we need to refer the same. Okay, let me replace this to-dos list, and now there is no need to do this direct access. We can do dot id. The same goes with subtitle dot title. Let me save this. Let me restart our application. Yes, now we have this get to-dos button. I'll click on that. Took some time. Now we have the same page, but now we have used the model instead of directly accessing the JSON object. Let's add some color to this list tile color. Colors dot pink accent. Save. And also let's enclose this list tile with the card view. So that it looks a bit better. Yes. So let us change the text color here. Save, restart, get to-dos. Yes. So now this is fine. So now we'll do one thing. So whenever we click on this to-dos, so now there is nothing happening, right? It is internally it is calling an API, but to the user he is not able to see any actions till we get the response back. Let's add a load indicator inside this elevated button, right? So here, before that, let's create a is loading property. Is loading, initially let it be false. Okay. So now in our elevated button child, let's add that condition, whether is loading true, then let's add a circular progress indicator. Okay, let's add some color to it, or maybe colors dot blue for now. Else let us show get to-dos. Okay, and now we need to disable that circular loading indicator, right, whenever we get the response. So that is here. Maybe when we get this 200, let's set the is loading to false. Okay, here whenever we call this fetch method, we need to set state and is loading as true, because it will start to load, right? True. And also in else also, let's do this false, so that even though when we not got the response, let's stop this indicator and we can show some respective error messages. So let me restart the application. Now that is cleared. Let me click on this. As you can see, we got the load indicator. After that we got the response. So as soon as we get the response, the load indicator will be stopped, right? So that is how we can get the response from the APIs. Also we can cover one more scenario here. So now on click of this button, we are getting the calling the API and getting the response, binding it to the UI. But in so many scenarios, we may need to call the API initially without any button clicks, right? So whenever we launch application or whenever we navigate to some pages, right? So we should call the APIs and we should render the data without any triggers. So we can do that using a method called init state. Okay. So we have a method called init state in our state class. So this method will be get called without the triggers. Okay. So from this method, let us call the super dot init state. Okay. And we can directly call the fetch data method. Okay. So now let me save this and let me reload the application. Yes, see, initially without clicking this button, there was a load indicator came and the data loaded, and also it binded to the UI, right? So that's how this init state works. If we don't need this init state and upon button click we need to get the data from API, we can do that. Otherwise we can have this init state and directly we can load the data whenever we navigate to this page. I'll restart the application once again. As you can see, I have not tapped on anything, but it loaded the data. So this is how we can make an API call, and also we can bind the data to the UI. So if you face any issues while running this in your machine, please do let me know. I'll try to reply for your queries. And also please do like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.